Ladies and gentlemen, pain is an inescapable part of life. When it hurts, when the weight of existence presses down on you so heavily that you can barely stand, when a suffering feels like a never-ending abyss, the question is not whether you will experience pain, the question is what you will do with it. Because life is suffering. This is not a cynical observation, it is an undeniable truth. To be human is to be vulnerable, to be fragile, to be finite. You will lose things you love. You will watch time carve itself into the faces of those around you. You will be betrayed, disappointed, and left alone in the dark. There will be days, perhaps many, where you will wonder if it is even worth continuing. And in those moments, the easy path is to give in, to let bitterness take root, to surrender to resentment and say, this is unfair. The world is broken. I have been wronged. And maybe you have. Maybe life has treated you cruelly. Maybe you were handed burdens no person should have to carry. But none of that changes the fundamental truth. You are still responsible for what comes next. The worst thing you can do when you're in pain is let it define you. If you allow suffering to shape you into something twisted and resentful, then pain is won. And make no mistake, pain is an adversary. It is an ever-present force that will consume you if you do not stand against it. But you are not powerless. You are not merely a victim of circumstance. When it hurts, you have a choice. You can let the pain pull you downward into despair, or you can use it as fuel. You can take that suffering and turn it into strength. You can learn from it, grow from it, become something more because of it. Every hardship carries within it the seed of transformation, but only if you are willing to face it. And that is not easy. Nothing about this is easy. To look pain in the eye and refuse to be broken by it is the most difficult thing you will ever do. But what is the alternative? To crumble, to become bitter and spiteful, to take your pain out on the world and make everything worse. That is not a life worth living. That is not a path that leads anywhere but to ruin. The only way forward is through. Stand up straight. Face what hurts. Accept responsibility, even for things that are not entirely your fault. Find the smallest thing you can fix and fix it. Build something out of the wreckage. Turn yourself into the person who can withstand the storms of life, not because you are immune to suffering, but because you have become someone who can carry it. There is strength in choosing to keep going when every fiber of your being wants to stop. There is courage in refusing to let pain turn you into something lesser than what you could be. When it hurts, remember that the suffering itself is not the end, it is only a chapter, and you are the one who decides what happens next. Pain is an unavoidable reality of life. It is woven into the very fabric of existence, present in every human experience, from birth to death. No one is exempt from suffering, and no amount of preparation, intelligence, or strength can completely shield a person from encountering pain in some form. This fundamental truth may seem discouraging, but understanding it is the first step toward resilience. If suffering is inevitable, then the question is not how to avoid it, but how to navigate it without allowing it to break you. From the moment we enter the world, pain is a defining force. It exists in the struggles of infancy, the uncertainties of adolescence, the burdens of adulthood, and the losses that accumulate with age. Whether it manifests as physical pain, emotional distress, or psychological hardship, suffering finds its way into every life. This reality is not a flaw in existence. It is simply part of what it means to be human. Many people fall into the trap of believing that suffering is something that should not happen, that it is an unnatural interruption in what should otherwise be a smooth and comfortable life. But this perspective leads only to frustration because it creates unrealistic expectations. The notion that life can be completely free of suffering is not just misleading, it is dangerous. When people assume that happiness and comfort should be the default state, they are unprepared for the inevitable hardships they will face. This lack of preparation can lead to feelings of helplessness, bitterness, and even resentment toward life itself. Instead of accepting pain as a challenge to be faced, they view it as an injustice. This mindset weakens a person's ability to handle adversity, making even small difficulties seem overwhelming. Acknowledging that pain is a natural part of life does not mean surrendering to it. It means understanding that suffering is not a personal failure, nor is it an indication that life is unfairly targeting certain individuals. Everyone, regardless of their background, status, or abilities, will experience pain. Some may suffer more than others, but no one is immune. This realization is not meant to be discouraging. Rather, it should serve as a foundation for strength. If suffering is inevitable, then it must be met with resilience, not avoidance. When people accept that pain is an unavoidable reality, they can begin to shift their focus. Instead of constantly seeking ways to eliminate all discomfort, they can work on developing the internal tools necessary to withstand it. This does not mean ignoring pain or pretending it does not exist. It means facing it with a mindset that prioritizes growth and adaptation. Those who understand this principle are better equipped to handle life's challenges, not because they avoid suffering, but because they learn how to carry it without letting it consume them. Life does not offer the choice of whether or not to experience pain. The only choice is how to respond to it. Acknowledging this truth allows individuals to develop resilience, adaptability, and a deeper sense of purpose. Pain, rather than being an enemy, becomes a force that can be harnessed for strength and transformation. While pain itself may be inevitable, how one responds to it is a matter of personal responsibility. Many people believe that suffering is something that happens to them, as if they are powerless against the hardships of life. While it is true that much of what causes pain, loss, illness, betrayal, failure may be beyond an individual's control, the way a person chooses to react to these struggles is always within their power. This distinction is critical because it determines whether suffering becomes a destructive force or a catalyst for growth. Taking responsibility in the face of hardship does not mean ignoring pain or pretending it does not exist. It means recognizing that no matter how unfair or difficult a situation may be, the response to it remains a choice. One of the greatest mistakes a person can make is assuming that their suffering excuses them from responsibility. It is easy to justify inaction, bitterness, or even harmful behavior by pointing to the pain one has endured. People who fall into this trap begin to believe that their suffering gives them permission to lash out, to retreat from life, or to abandon their obligations. This mindset, while understandable, is ultimately self-defeating. Pain may not be a person's fault, but their response to it is their responsibility. Blaming external circumstances, even when justified, does nothing to improve the situation. It only deepens the suffering by reinforcing a sense of helplessness. Taking responsibility in times of hardship requires an active approach. It means looking at a difficult situation and asking, what can I do? Even in the worst circumstances, there is always something within a person's control, even if it is just their attitude toward the pain they are experiencing. A person may not be able to change the loss of a loved one, the betrayal of a friend, or the collapse of a career, but they can control whether they allow these hardships to define them. They can choose to move forward, to rebuild, to focus on what remains rather than what has been lost. This is not about ignoring suffering, but about refusing to let it dictate the future. People often underestimate the power of small actions in difficult times. When life feels overwhelming, it is easy to believe that nothing can be done to make things better. However, even the smallest step toward improvement matters. Cleaning a room, maintaining a routine, seeking help, or setting a simple goal, these actions, though minor, reinforce the idea that one still has control over something. And in that control, there is strength. Responsibility is not about fixing everything at once. It is about refusing to surrender to chaos. Hardship presents a choice to be consumed by suffering or to take responsibility for how it is handled. The difference between those who overcome adversity and those who are broken by it is not the presence or absence of pain, but the mindset with which it is approached. Responsibility is not just a burden, it is a source of power. It transforms suffering from something meaningless into something that can be learned from, adapted to, and ultimately overcome. Resentment and victimhood are two of the most destructive responses to stress. When people experience pain, especially when it feels unjust or overwhelming, there is a natural temptation to blame external forces for their suffering. This can be directed at other people, at society, or even at life itself. While this response may provide temporary relief by shifting responsibility elsewhere, it ultimately leads to a downward spiral of bitterness, anger, and stagnation. The more a person fixates on how unfair their suffering is, the less capable they become of overcoming it. Resentment arises when people believe that they have been wronged in a way that cannot be corrected. It festers when suffering is perceived as undeserved, particularly when others appear to be free from similar struggles. This is a dangerous mindset because it distorts reality. Life does not distribute suffering equally, but no one is completely free from hardship. Focusing only on one's own pain while ignoring the struggles of others creates an illusion of personal injustice. This illusion can lead to deep bitterness, as the person begins to believe they have been uniquely targeted by misfortune. That belief does not just increase suffering, it ensures that the person remains trapped in it. Victimhood is another dangerous mindset that often follows resentment. When someone identifies as a victim, they define themselves by their suffering rather than by their ability to overcome it. This mindset removes personal agency and replaces it with passivity. If a person believes that they are powerless in the face of hardship, they stop looking for solutions. They become stuck, waiting for the world to change rather than taking action themselves. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes to break free from the belief that they are helpless. Over time, the victim mentality becomes a form of self-imposed imprisonment, where suffering is not just something experienced, but something embraced as part of one's identity. Both resentment and victimhood share a common flaw. They place the cause of suffering entirely outside of the individual. This may feel justified, especially when pain is caused by external forces, but it is ultimately a trap. When a person believes that all their suffering is the fault of others, they give up control over their own life. They become dependent on forces beyond their reach to fix their circumstances, which rarely happens. Even when injustice is real, even when suffering is undeserved, placing all blame on the outside world does nothing to create a way forward. The alternative to resentment and victimhood is personal responsibility. This does not mean ignoring pain or pretending that injustice does not exist. Instead, it means refusing to let suffering dictate one's identity. People who move beyond victimhood acknowledge their hardships, but do not allow themselves to be defined by them. They take whatever control they have, no matter how small, and use it to create progress. Even in the worst situations, there is always some action that can be taken, even if it is just the choice to adopt a different mindset. Bitterness and victimhood promise comfort, but they only prolong suffering. The way out of pain is not through resentment, but through action. Those who refuse to be trapped by their hardships, who reject the temptation to blame the world for all their suffering, are the ones who find the strength to rebuild. Resentment does nothing but deepen suffering, while responsibility provides a path toward overcoming it. The choice between these two mindsets is one of the most important decisions a person will ever make. When faced with hardship, many people become overwhelmed by the scale of their suffering. Pain can feel so immense that it paralyzes a person, making even the smallest action seem pointless. The mind fixates on the enormity of the problem, and as a result, no solution seems possible. This is one of the greatest dangers of suffering. It creates the illusion, the creep. However, no matter how difficult life becomes, there is always something within a person's control, even if it is just the smallest, most seemingly insignificant action. The key to moving forward in times of hardship is not waiting for a grand solution, but instead focusing on what can be done, however minor it may seem. One of the most effective ways to regain control during difficult times is to start with something manageable. This could be as simple as cleaning a space, organizing a schedule, getting out of bed at a set time, or writing down thoughts in a journal. These actions may not solve the larger problem, but they create momentum. Momentum is crucial because when suffering takes hold, the mind tends to spiral into negativity, reinforcing the belief that everything is hopeless. Even a small accomplishment disrupts this cycle. It proves that, despite the pain, progress is still possible. People often underestimate the power of these small actions because they seem insignificant compared to the weight of their suffering. But small actions compound over time. A single improvement may not change everything immediately, but it creates the foundation for larger progress. When a person begins to make small improvements, they start to see that they are not entirely powerless. This shift in perspective is crucial because suffering thrives on the belief that there is no way out. By focusing on one small, achievable task, a person reclaims a sense of control, and that control builds strength. Another advantage of focusing on small actions is that it prevents the tendency to rely on unrealistic expectations. Many people believe that overcoming hardship requires a dramatic breakthrough, some major event that will suddenly make everything better. This mindset is dangerous because it leads to passivity. When people wait for a perfect solution, they do nothing in the meantime. They remain trapped in their suffering, hoping for an external force to intervene. But life rarely offers grand solutions. Real progress happens in small, consistent steps. Taking responsibility for small improvements also changes the way suffering is perceived. When a person begins to make even minor progress, their pain stops being something that completely dominates them. Instead of seeing themselves as a victim of their circumstances, they start to see themselves as someone who's actively shaping their future despite the pain. This shift is not just psychological, it has a direct impact on behavior. A person who believes they have control over their actions will continue to take steps forward, while someone who believes they are helpless will remain stuck. Pain can make life feel chaotic and unmanageable. The key to overcoming it is not to search for an immediate, all-encompassing solution, but to start with what is possible. Even the smallest action in the right direction is better than being frozen by despair. No matter how overwhelming suffering may feel, there is always something that can be done. And it is through these small, constructive actions that true recovery begins. Pain is often seen as something purely negative, something to be avoided at all costs. When people experience suffering, they naturally want to escape from it, numb it, or find a way to make it disappear. But pain, despite its difficulty, carries within it an opportunity for growth, strength, and transformation. While suffering itself is never desirable, how a person responds to it determines whether it becomes a destructive force or a tool for self-improvement. The most resilient individuals are not those who have never suffered, but those who have learned how to use their suffering as a catalyst for personal development. When faced with pain, people often feel powerless, as if they are being crushed under the weight of their suffering. However, pain forces a person to confront their own limitations, their weaknesses, and their deepest fears. It reveals what is fragile within them, but at the same time, it offers a chance to strengthen those fragile parts. A person who has never faced difficulty remains untested, and an untested person does not know what they are truly capable of. Hardship exposes a person's vulnerabilities, but in doing so, it also presents the chance to overcome them. One of the most powerful ways pain can lead to growth is by forcing people to reevaluate their lives. When everything is comfortable and predictable, there is little incentive to change. People settle into routines, avoid discomfort, and resist challenges, but suffering disrupts this stability. It forces a person to ask difficult questions. What truly matters? What needs to change? What am I capable of enduring? These questions, painful as they may be, often lead to profound personal transformation. Many of the strongest, most admirable individuals are those who have faced significant suffering and used it as an opportunity to rebuild themselves into something greater than they were before. Pain also teaches discipline and resilience. When someone learns to endure suffering without allowing it to break them, they develop an inner strength that cannot be easily shaken. The ability to persist in the face of hardship is one of the most valuable traits a person can cultivate. It allows them to navigate future challenges with greater confidence and stability. A person who has learned how to endure pain without collapsing under it becomes more capable, not just in handling their own struggles, but also in supporting others. Those who have suffered deeply often develop a greater sense of empathy, understanding, and wisdom. This does not mean that suffering is inherently good or that people should seek it out. But when pain does come, and there is a choice to be made, a person can allow it to weaken them, to make them bitter and hopeless, or they can use it as fuel for growth. They can learn from it, build upon it, and emerge from it stronger than before. The most transformative changes in life often come not from moments of comfort, but from moments of great struggle. Pain, when faced correctly, is not just something to endure. It is something that can shape a person into their highest potential.